We're just going to wait a couple more minutes and see if we get any other people in the room. So, we will be back in a second.
Your meeting notice and then.
You got a meeting note? All right, guys, welcome to our TAC meeting. Couple of things. One, thank you for taking the time to join us, either in the room or on streaming or on the phone. A couple of things. This is being recorded, so if you wanted to check it out later, you can do that off of our TAC website. Also, the slides are available on the website now. If you wanted to follow along and you weren't using being able to see it here in the room. So we will go ahead and do some introductions. First, I know we have some DEQ staff also listening and watching, but if we can have the people that are not DEQ on the phone, please go ahead and introduce yourselves. Maybe name and who you're with. Is that it? All right, let's go ahead and go around the room. I'll start. I'm Liz Ulrich. I'm the supervisor of the Analysis and Planning Services section for the Air Quality Bureau here at DEQ. How about if we go to my left?
I'm Chris Dorrington, Administrator, Energy and Mining at DEQ.
I'm Dave Galt. I'm a consultant with Brown and Calsac Berry and Holman, and I'm here representing Calumet, Montana Refining.
Agent Trank with the Treasure State Resources Association.
Chris Hiltonen, Bison Engineering.
Julie Merkel, Air Quality Bureau Permitting.
Norm Mullen, Department of Environmental Quality Attorney.
Julie Ackerland, Analysis and Planning Services section of the Air Quality Bureau.
Hello, everyone. David Klemp, Air Quality Bureau Chief.
Rebecca Harbage, Planner with the Air Quality Bureau.
Okay, and so in the room, you can see we don't have the mics set up on the tables, but the system we have now should be able to pick it up pretty well if you speak up. So, and people on the phone, go ahead and just chime in if you have questions. We definitely want this to be a dialogue. We want, if you feel comfortable saving your questions till the end of the presentations, that's fine, but we want to hear what you guys also have to say. We're not just talking to you, we want to talk with you. And that goes for the future. If you guys have additional agenda items that you would like us to get to, please let either Rebecca or I know about those. We have 2 presentations today. Dave Klemp is going to kick it off, and he's going to be the bulk of it, but we do have an update at the end from Julie Ackerland about our stores test protocol workshop that we held. So with that, here's Dave Klemp.
All right, thanks. And Liz, I wasn't sure if you introduced. That was Liz Ulrich, our planning supervisor. So how about Gordon? I'll do a mic check with you. Can you hear me okay? Excellent, thank you. And does everybody on the phone have the presentation sitting in front of them, air quality operating fees? A beautiful blue slide. All right, great, thank you very much. Those on the phone, I'm sorry you're going to miss out. I wore my very best and only lucky green shirt today for this presentation since we are talking fees, revenue, and some proposed changes that we need to make. So sorry, you guys are missing out on that one. All right, we need to talk about some operating fees. When this notice went out a couple weeks ago, a little shorter time frame than we like to give. However, it was hot on the heels of a lot of agency discussion over revenue fees across all program areas. And also, we were just completing some of our emission inventory work. So we needed to try to get that work completed as quickly as possible so we had the most up-to-date and accurate information as possible. So before we start, I really want to thank all of those folks who exceeded our expectations in terms of submitting emission inventory information. Usually, we don't get information till around mid-February. We started in early January and really asked folks to submit that information early. We can't require it by rule any earlier than mid-February, but virtually, I want to say we had a very large percentage of folks submit early, which allowed us to process the information early and allowed us to have that information available as we approach this fee discussion, which we need to absolutely have. This presentation that I'm giving today, there are a couple folks that I think have been around since the last time we raised air quality operating fees, and that was in 2009. So this presentation that I have today builds upon a lot of the same fundamental principles and other information that we committed to in 2009. And I did not change the color at all since 2009, so hopefully it's still in. I got a lot of grief from that. So you'll see, you'll see a lot of similar things, and that's really important. Get stuck. There we go. All right. So I want to back up a little bit. 2009. That was the last time we had a significant appropriation increase at the legislature that required a decision package. At that point in time, we were increasing our appropriation roughly 30%. So it was a 2009 session. If we can go back in 2007, 2008, things were going very well across the state. But in 2009, when we went into that session, we were starting to see some signs of a recession. There were folks around the table, Don Allen, Don Quander, Mr. Galt, and others that were cautiously supportive of the decision packages that we had in front of the legislature to increase our appropriation. Interestingly enough, the appropriation that we sought in 2009, we're below that today. So embedded in that support was the commitment that DEQ and specifically the air quality program had with all of the folks, including the legislative subcommittee, was to look at some issues that had occurred around air quality fees. At that time, there was a lot of concern over the subsidizing that was going on. Existing facilities were subsidizing new facilities. Large facilities were subsidizing small facilities. So there was a lot of conversation over fee equity. There was also a lot of concern over how sustainable the revenues that we were needing at that time were, certainly as we moved into the recession. There were some folks that said, you know what, industry, other folks are seeing roughly a 20 to even 30% reduction, and that at some point in time, DEQ, specifically the Air Quality Bureau, can expect to see some of those similar things. And I will say a lot of the stuff, it's very interesting in this presentation, I didn't need to change because I think it foreshadowed, the accurate foreshadowing that came out of that session has really helped us come today with a fee increase that we haven't had to have since 2009. So I want to go through some of those objectives. I also want to go through and reiterate some of the things that are covered by air quality fees. We'll deal with our appropriation, certainly. And then there is a process for air quality fee setting. A lot of it starts here, or at least this is an early step in that. And then towards the end, I've got some very detailed slides over a couple different options for fees. Total number of slides, I think, is 12. So the first 10 are dealing with some of these other things. Thank you. All right. So these were some of the objectives that we had in 2009 that I think are absolutely still relevant today, is that we really want to fund the core air quality requirements. Now, I know there's a lot of discussion about what those may be, and I've got another slide that deals specifically with some of those core activities moving forward. Dealing with what we dealt with in any legislative session, certainly since 2009 and it exists today, is we also want to minimize the impact of fee payers, on the fee payers. When we go to target a revenue, it is a dollar amount, but the impact is not felt. The impact of that dollar amount and how it's allocated is not felt always evenly across all of those folks that are paying fees. We want to improve that equity, and I'll go through some instances where we've taken steps, and some of the things we will propose to you today takes additional steps. I will tell you right up front, there are more steps that we still need to take moving into the future. This last slide, or this last bullet, is really process improvement oriented, leaning our operations. We've got a whole bunch of activities to report on, some that we've been very successful in implementing, and some that we're about ready to implement on. Some of you attended meetings on that today. So before we come and ask for any money, whether it's an appropriation or a fee increase, revenue increase, we want to make sure that we can demonstrate to folks that we're running just as lean as absolutely possible. And we still got some steps to take in that regard. All right, first dealing with one of the objectives on improving fee equity. And again, moving forward, we will need to continue in this area. You know, we're not done. Some of the actions that we have taken over the last 10 years have been to change not the operating fees, but to change the application fees. We spend a lot of resources on application fees. In 2009, everybody paid a $500 application fee. When you go through lawsuits and big long permitting actions, you know, Southern Montana Electric was the entity that was highlighted back in 2009. Sometimes we spend tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars processing applications and defending things, all for a $500 application fee. We intentionally kept that low through the years. There was an idea that that would incentivize economic development through low application fees. While our application fees are not anywhere near outrageous, and certainly compared to other states, we did take some steps to increase some of those application fees in 2014. in front of the Board of Environmental Review. That's, again, the outcome, hoping to reduce the subsidization of the new applicants. This next one is an area that is still in progress. It's the big facilities essentially subsidizing the small facilities. The first thing we did in 2009 was to institute a larger administrative fee. Throughout the history of the fee program, which dates back to 1991, we've always had some sort of administrative fee plus a per ton fee. I think prior to this it was around 400, and it was a weird number, it was like $462. Don't ask me how we came up with that. We came up with $462. It worked out in the math someplace. But we increased that to $800. The recognition is that when folks have a permit, that there is some cost associated with the administration of a program that should be spread out and borne amongst all of the folks that are in that program. So roughly right now, we have 275 facilities that pay an administrative fee along with a per ton fee. And that's what we're talking about here. And there will be the last slide has a lot of these categories broken down. Good. Here's another activity that we really sought to change in 2009 that we did, I think, a really, really good job of for about 10 years, and it's reared its ugly head again recently. Historically, we used to go in the negative. And you can see by the numbers as high as 517,000 in 2006, sometimes substantially in the negative. So we wanted to reduce or minimize the negative fund balances that we were encountering, some of the intra-agency loans that were necessary from junk vehicles and other things to cover the expenses until such time as we sent our bills and essentially the Colstrip facility paid their bill. As soon as Colstrip paid their bill, we were back in the black moving forward. And you can see 2008 up until 2018. So this last fiscal year 2018, which was last fall, we went negative again. And so not a surprise, disappointing that we aren't able to sustain that in the black. But I think that's also an impetus for us to change some of the fees right now.
So Dave,
Yes, sir.
Fiscal year 2008 and 2018, did the legislature ever try to siphon off, or did they ever, in appropriation, siphon off some of
The fund balance, for those on the phone, the question was, were we in danger of losing some of the fund balance that we had accumulated during legislative session or otherwise? I want to say yes. It never ended up in front of budget subcommittee, but as we're preparing for the legislature and you have the budget analysts from the legislative services come over and talk with agencies and go through the budget document, it was highlighted a number of times that there was a fund balance in air quality. What got us through that is there's a statutory restriction on what those fees can be used for. And it wasn't significant enough. The maximum fund balance that I recall is around $2.5 million. And that was about 4 or 5 years ago. And it didn't rise to the level of some of the other fund balances. Many of you, and I think Dave, you've brought that to our attention before, it's pretty dangerous having a large fund balance. What we targeted in 2009 was anywhere between $100,000 to $250,000 as a fund balance. If you look at this slide, we were comfortable in the program at anywhere from $6 to maybe $750,000 because we wanted to cover the biggest year that we went negative. And that way you cover your expenses, but yet you don't have the profile. So there were attempts. And I do think that I know I lost some sleep over carrying a large fund balance because there are some that believe that's not really good management of your program. That fund balance was indicative of some of the other things that we'll go through of us trying to be, I think, fiscally responsible. All right, this is something that we're really trying to ingrain in our culture and keep ingrained, get it deeply ingrained, is constant process improvement and streamlining our operations. Many of you in CAC have heard us say this before. We're using some of the same regulatory programs that we have used since the 70s. And the problems and the issues that we face today are not the same things across the board for everything since the 70s. So everything that we do, and I torment managers and staff, and I'm tormented by my administrator and director and everything else, is any decision that we have to look to say, how can we do this differently? How can we do this better? Make the best even better. Primarily over the last decade or so, how we were able to accrue any sort of fund balance and operating headspace has been through the handling of vacancies in personal services. Personal services roughly are 80% of our budget, so that is the dominating aspect of that. In 2009, we increased to 51 plus FTE. So if we did have vacancies, we would hold it open for a period of time, accrue some vacancy savings, while we look to see whether or not we needed to either redirect or maybe even eliminate that position. We instituted a process, what worked with this position, what didn't work, what are our problems today, what are our problems likely to be tomorrow. In many instances, and this has happened over the last decade, we have actually stepped down some of the FTE in the Bureau, and we don't have the same type of people working in the Air Quality Bureau today. To streamline the operations, we needed to electronify the Bureau. So we've taken a couple positions and created systems analysts so that we can do things electronically moving forward. You can't do it all with people necessarily, but some of our processes need to change. Thank you all. In 2015, a lot of you supported the ability to further develop registration projects or processes across the Bureau. Very successful oil and gas well registration program, and we're working currently now on a portable source registration process that very closely mirrors EPA's program that we hope to have implemented just as quickly as possible moving forward. Registration or permit by rule doesn't work for everybody or every entity, but if there are more, I think there's more opportunities to use programs like that where the process doesn't really add a lot of value. And there may be some things that we haven't even talked about yet moving forward. And while we're advancing slides, those on the phone, I tend to get going pretty quickly. If you do have a question, please feel free to interrupt. All right, this slide has been a topic that has been very near and dear to virtually every CAC participant's heart. It's like, okay, we're paying these fees, what are you spending it on? And I mentioned the statutory restriction on that. And in general, if you read the statute, it deals with the permitting, administration of the permitting program, which does contemplate some sort of compliance. There's rule writing, there's modeling, there's all of the things that we list here. It also contemplates enforcement. So this is not an exhaustive list of every single activity that we undertake with air quality fees. But in general, it covers all of the areas where fees are spent across the agency. So the Air Quality Bureau, through this process, collects all the operating fees for the agency, but we don't spend all of the operating fees on the agency. There is a portion that is sent to now the Energy Bureau, which is also in Chris's division, for the Small Business Ombudsman. There's also a portion of those fees that go to the Enforcement Division. When we were reorganized in 1995, there was a couple FTE that were taken from the Air Quality Division at that time and placed in the enforcement program. And those positions are dedicated or focused primarily on air quality enforcement type activities. The other area is legal. We do pay some for legal services across the agency. There's also some administration that a portion of my boss's salary and the division support is paid for that. All told, it's just south of 40 FTE. So we were north of 51, now we're just south of 40 in terms of what our revenue projections are based upon. Incidentally, when we talk about fee-funded activities, I can assure you there is a very robust discussion across the agency about how the different types and funds the colors of fees and how they're used moving forward. So that's something that the agency is very vigilant on. All right, here's a slide that really gets into kind of the meat and potatoes, and I throw up for information purposes. We're not talking about FY, currently in FY18. What we're talking about is fees for FY19. Roughly, here's an idea of what our appropriation is in 2018, $4.4 million. Please remember in 2009, we went up to almost 4.6 in appropriation. That's not the money, that's just the appropriation. 19 and 20, obviously we don't know what 20 is because that's going into a legislative session. So I kept it the same. 19, we're about 4.5 for an appropriation. Our projected expenditure, and I'll go through what that's based upon, is about $4.3 million. If you look on the, and I'm going to use this, folks on the phone aren't going to see me using the pointer. If you look at what we're, last year, what we billed for was roughly $3.4 million. And that is including all the flat fees, the administrative fees, and the per ton fees. So you can see a gap. This 3.360 number, million, is the information, is the projected collection billing that we will send out in November at the existing fee rates. All right, so it's the emission inventories that we just completed, along with the number of registered oil and gas well facilities and the flat fee payers, to say, okay, if we sent bills out using the existing fee structure, that's what we would collect, which would result in a shortfall of roughly $1 million, 993 from our projected expenditure. So let me tell you what the projected expenditure is based upon. Roughly 39 plus FTE. Please keep in mind that the Air Quality Bureau also gets has gotten a little bit of general fund. The last couple bienniums, we have not had any general fund. So that contemplates roughly $175,000 of general fund coming back into the program, right? So the expenditure has been reduced by that amount. We also get some federal grant. Federal grant has run around $1.1 to $1.2 million essentially for this part of it. If you're following a lot of the federal activity, the federal grant, been a lot of question marks, some proposed significant reductions. So this contemplates a 30% reduction in the federal grant. Even if this omnibus budget passes at the federal level, that restores the grants to previously federal fiscal year 2017 levels. Please keep in mind that that number is based on a 2012 change. So those fees have been stagnant and losing power, buying power, for the last 6 to 7 years, moving forward. So that's what that is built into in an effort to, I'm going to call it worst case, in an effort to try to be worst case. Those projected expenditures also contemplate a roughly 30% reduction in the air quality fees that would go to the Energy Bureau for the Small Business Ombudsman, the Enforcement Division. Does not contemplate a reduction to the attorney pool. That's what that expenditure is based upon. Part of the reason that's so important that folks understand that is that's what we're going to target for the revenue. We're going to target this number, not the 4,576,817 number, the lower of the two. I'm going to pause there for a moment. Anybody on the phone, did I go through that too quickly or in a disjointed fashion? You have questions? Okay. Thank you. So here's our process. As I mentioned, we want to identify our target revenue. And again, historically, since 2009, we have not collected our appropriation. We have collected anywhere in revenue from 4.2, some years 3.8 to 4.2, $4.3 million. We're also not building into that revenue amount any carryover. So we're keeping that at zero when we target that. One of the other revenue streams that is oftentimes an unknown is the application fees. We do have fees for application that we mentioned. One of the things that we decided as a group in 2009 was not to factor that into the revenue calculation. That has helped because they're unreliable. We don't know. When they don't come in and you project that they're coming in, then you're already running at a deficit. What we've done since 2009 is not put it in the target revenue, but yet take that money and to either reduce or eliminate the need to change fees in subsequent years. So it's still going to be counted. It's just going to be in subsequent years for revenue was not contemplated. We also have different source categories, operating fees. We have some flat fee facilities. Oil and gas well facilities currently pay $800 per registration. Portable facilities currently pay $800 per permit that they have. Then we have the administrative fees, and that's roughly 275 facilities in this state pay the $800 plus the cost per ton, which is $38.24 per ton. Moving forward. Just so you know, oil and gas well facilities, we got 1,234 of them currently registered. Portable facilities, we have 350 portable facilities. And we'll go through those revenue streams on the next slide. Oh, yeah. All right, here's some of the other factors, and as I unveil what we're proposing, please keep in mind we're trying to take additional steps towards that fee equity. We also want to reflect what our current program and our future program needs are going to be. Don't want to just go collect money for a program that we've been running since 1970 the same way. We really need to see where we're going in the future, and the future of air quality, I think, could be very different than its past. We also have to determine what ability we have to offset fees with other funds. We've already gone through some of those discussions. You all know the state of the general fund in Montana. Interestingly enough, sitting in EQC this morning, they were making a great case for general fund for open burning, because of the public impacts and everything else associated with fire. And that is an area that without general fund, we can't do our smoke forecast. That's not smoke management. That's very different. And as I mentioned, the EPA grant is somewhat unreliable at this point in time moving forward. One of the other things that we've talked about for the life of this program is, do we continue to stay below the federal presumptive fee? When Title V came about, which is the basis for the fee programs in this and virtually every other state, EPA put together what they assumed would be the cost for running a program, Title V program. It started at roughly $25 per ton. At that point in time, we were $2.18 per ton, as a state. And it's continued to be adjusted, I think, primarily by a CPI inflation factor. Historically, we have always tried to stay below the federal presumptive fee as a means when people look at doing business in this state as to how we compare. The question is, do we need to be guided by that moving forward? All right, so here's the meat and potatoes. Here's the last two slides, and we hopefully have a really robust discussion. What I put together here is a couple different scenarios. The first scenario deals with 100%, recovering 100% of the shortfall. So it would be the 354 number for the revenue projections, that we have. And this table, hopefully, as we talk through it, we can understand a little bit about what some of the implications are of collecting that revenue. So looking at the different fee types, we got 350 portables at $800 a pop, generates $280,000. Currently and proposed. I'm separating portables from others because we've got a process that we're undertaking right now to significantly reduce the amount of resources that we're going to be spending on portables, and changes some of the focus areas without backing off on any air quality protections. That's the registration program that is under development. We believe that that's roughly the $280,000 is right on par with what we need to run that program. So as part of that registration effort, once we get through the development of the program, then one of the final tasks of that subgroup will be, all right, what's it going to take to fund it? If it's more than $280,000, we got to figure out how to essentially have that source category pay for itself. So currently keeping it the same. The oil and gas registration facilities, what we're finding, and I know Alan Olson was not going to be here today. I need to work with him as well on this. Currently, we collect $800 per registration. That roughly funds 7 FTE in the Bureau. So it was 7 whether it was 51, and it's 7 whether or not it's 39. We spend more resources on oil and gas registration than the revenue that we collect. So this proposal is taking that $800 flat fee up to $1,000. So a $200 increase. I'm stating the obvious here because it seems like a small increase. It takes that revenue up a couple $100,000. And so the impact of that couple $100,000 increase for a company that has 150 registrations, you're increasing $30,000 their annual fee. 150 times the $200 difference. Okay, so that's why I think it's important we understand the implications of those types of things. It does not get us yet where I believe we need to be, but it's a step moving forward.
Dave, do you just have a feel for, are the registration numbers increasing at a higher or lower rate as time goes on, or there more and more?
Price of oil. Right now, there hasn't been a lot of development, a lot of drilling. Price of oil is down. Not trying to levy an additional tax on them. Embedded in your question is, and maybe you didn't ask this, but I think we need to be at least about 40% of our program funding comes from that universe. If we look at regional haze, if we look at the air quality implications, the monitoring, and where we're spending a lot of resources and where we see, some value in a field presence, that's a big source category, and it's on the other end of the state.
Right.
Right, the administrative fee, if you look at the administrative fee, that's 275 times 800. I mean, if you look at the numbers, if you increase, what I'm also looking at is what happens if you change the administrative fee by $100. All right, you get $27,000. I don't know that that's the area where we need the increase. So I kept that the same for this exercise. What I changed more than anything was I tried to back calculate what we would need to get on a per ton basis in order to fully collect the revenue that we anticipate spending next fiscal year. So this $48,980 is not the final number. It is the number that I used as we were communicating up through management, so I wanted to keep it consistent. This number has increased by a couple hundred tons, I think 300 tons. As we finalized a lot of the emission inventories and, shook the sofas of the Davenport to see what sort of emissions would fall out, a couple hundred tons fell out. So if we were to move forward, with this 5350 would go down to reflect that. How much it goes down depends on how much falls out of the sofa cushions. I'm not anticipating we're going to find another 1,000 tons that meaningfully impacts, that number. So in order to fully fund our expected revenues, given the assumptions, that I presented to you, we need to go from $38.24 a ton to $53.50. And Gordon, this is where I was wishing you were in the room because I really wanted to read your face. $38.24 a ton. $15 increase in 38, about what, 40%? Yes. Yes, it's based upon keeping the portables at $800 a pop, increasing the oil and gas registrations, $200 per, and then the increase in the per ton fee. So roughly of that $1 million, the per ton fee increases would be paying about 3/4 of that. The oil and gas well facilities would be paying roughly 1/4 of that. Yes, yeah, yep. We're projecting to collect around $3.2 million, Gordon, and we need 4.3. Yeah, I think a 50% increase makes up 3/4 of that. And Gordon's right, it is numbers and how we manage numbers, right? We generally started with the revenue that we're targeting. We have these factors, like emissions and flat fees, and then you can toggle different scenarios to come up with different numbers, which is why it's important to understand how different numbers impact folks differently. The coal strip facility is roughly 45%. So 45% of any fee increase on a per ton would be shouldered by one company. That's a result. Go ahead, Gordon. Over the past or the future? I think it's different. We've spent a lot of time, certainly not, Gordon, certainly not 50% of our program. And then moving forward, we know there's some decisions that will be made by companies that further impact or maybe exacerbate the situation. Well, Gordon, that's an excellent question. And, your first question is, have we thought about it? Absolutely, since the day we learned about it. Recognizing that, that's a double-edged sword. We're certainly, less emissions. At the same time, there's some money associated with those emissions. Here's how I'm looking at it, Gordon, and everybody else. If you look at the emissions number, roughly 49,000 tons. In 2009, we had 90+ thousand tons of emissions. So it spread that cost out a little different. I think it was around 2001, 2002 timeframe that the cap was eliminated from the fee structure. And there used to be a cap that I think when it was eliminated was no single facility would pay more than $250,000 of the fees. And then that cost was spread out amongst all the remaining fee payers. There were some decisions made way back then, 15+ years ago, that has changed. So what I'm looking at right now is we need to figure out at least a stopgap, because we've done the very best we can. There's some factors that have contributed to this. In the last 3 years, we've lost almost $400,000 in revenue because in 2014 inventories, we were at 61,000 tons. Now we're at 49. So when coal strip units 1 and 2 go down, that is going to be another significant decrease. We know we just can't continue passing along costs to everybody else and raising that dollar per ton. We have to change a lot. We have to change our processes. We're already changing our personnel. We will have to do more process and other changes, I think, across the Bureau and maybe across the agency, because we're not the only program that's impacted by coal strip. I don't have the solution to that, Gordon. I know that we have a few short years to look at this stuff and come up with some structural changes that help us, at least the midterm, that we can do without the benefit of changing statute. And we may need to get into the statute, certainly no later than 2021, and make some changes. Well, Josh, you bring up a good point. Yes, so we can all celebrate the clean air. I think every state is in this boat. As I work through some of the national associations, every state is trying to figure out how to deal with the declining tonnage and an increasing fees when there's arguably many more air quality requirements to implement today than there was yesterday, but there's not a solid funding source, a stable one. There is no silver bullet. And so, yeah, for the benefit of transparency, I really wanted to start with this one. At the end of this, we need to figure out how we get to the next steps. We need to go in front of the BER. We need to go in front of the BER fairly soon, no later than the June meeting, preferably earlier. We need to put some numbers together to get in front of the BER. And we kind of need to understand strategically, we want to set ourselves up for long-term success. If we bite off the larger amount this year, it will help alleviate some of the future pain. If we go to the next slide, at 50%, we're probably going to be okay. We're going to kick the can down the road to a time where every year closer to 2022 is going to be much more important. Well, they're all very important. It's going to be very, very challenging moving forward the closer we get to 2022. So this slide, by way of a segue, is a partial step. This is looking at roughly $500,000 and what it would do, keeping portables the same, oil and gas registration an increase of $100. And then what it would take on a per ton basis to collect our target. And that's roughly $45.93. So we would be going from $38.24 to $45.93 in this scenario. Now you can play with the numbers and look at this stuff and figure out pretty readily, you're dealing with 50,000 tons of emissions roughly. So for every dollar you increase, it's 50 grand. Same thing with oil and gas registration. For every $100 increment, you're generating about $120,000. So there may be ways, splitting the baby, going to, $950 or $875, but you're generally taking from one and putting it on another. It is a zero-sum game. Well, Gordon, I thought about that a lot, and so what for me is challenging is that living in this program for so long, looking at their traditional funding sources, admittedly, I might tell you I'm pretty innovative and creative, but I think I'm challenged by living in this program. I want to say the answer to that is yes, but I don't think we've done it to the degree we need to. We're looking at federal grants constantly, working national association. Therein lies one of the most valuable things that national associations bring is the voice to Washington DC to fund these programs. Those grant dollars have really been stagnant for a long time, and they've been underfunded for their entire life. So in 2009, Don Allen, Don Quandra, you guys need to push for more grant in your program. Well, we're pushing really hard. You need to push for more general fund. That was something that as we move forward in the air quality program, more and more general fund type activities are out there, but the general fund has gone down. So we need to continue to work those. One of the things that we're not mining right now that we need to talk through a stakeholder group is that do we start charging more closer to actual fees, actual expenditures for processing applications. Many states have gone to here's your final permit, but here's a bill, much like you get from Bison, maybe for a source test or something like that.
And we've done some in other states, the permit fee's $50,000.
Yep. And so that's where you get into, we need to have those conversations, Gordon. We've been very reluctant to turn our staff into consultants and tracking and billing time. But I think we need to relook at that. There may be some other areas that certainly other states or locals have talked through that we have not. Yep, thank you, Joshua. That's a very good suggestion. It certainly. Here's. Okay. Anybody else on the phone? Abby, that's an excellent question. We've tried to do some of that through the years. So we've established some org units, if you will, for the oil and gas well facilities. When we started getting that revenue, of course, the folks in that industry were saying, yeah, if I'm giving you $1 million, what am I getting for a service? And so there is some of that embedded in there. What we're actually spending is more than what we're billing. Because if you look at the people that are charging and, my time or, my boss's time and other folks across the Bureau, it's not 100% accurate, but it is embedded in some of these. With portables, they're very much designing a program. that's going to be implemented by less than 2 employees, as opposed to what I would bet, if we were tracking it accurately, would be closer to 4 or 5. Right, so we're going to get rid of the processing time of applications and spend it on education assistance, those types of things, activities in the field. So we're not compromising our program for, certainly we do get challenged from time to time whether or not we're implementing an appropriate program. But we are implementing a good program and just trying to fund some of the core activities that we need to do. Now for the per ton stuff, Abby, that goes absolutely to Gordon's question. I mean, it ebbs and flows depending on what the issue is of the day. And certainly during the clean power plan development versus maybe the future, there will be some different sources in the mix that do that. And we're not currently set up to do an accurate cost accounting. But it is something we got to pay attention to. Yeah. You know what? One way, Abby, and others that it was done in the past, and I don't know if we go back to this or not, but we used to talk about what pollutants do we spend most time on, and there used to be a break between some of the gaseous pollutants versus particulate pollutants, and we got rid of that about 15 years ago. I don't know if that's something we go to. There's also, we don't charge for all pollutants that we regulate. We got NOx and SOx and particulate and VOCs. We don't charge for CO. And that was intentional in the days when, Montana Power was in the state. And so those are some things that do produce revenue and that we can look at and probably should go through an exercise. But a lot of these things, I'm not so sure they change the distribution significantly or the impact of the change.
On industry.
On an industry, yeah. You may have somebody who's going to pay $25,000 whether you base it on NOx, SOx, and particulate and add in the CO. That would certainly drive down the numbers for some. Well, thank you, and please keep them coming. Abby mentioned the Regional Haze Program. That's an area that, again, as we look at this stuff, it's all in how you slice the pie, but the pie still stays the same. We have not gone to the legislature or gone to CAC to get a specific regional haze fee. Because as you look at the sources that we're going to be looking at regional haze, it gets towards the, resource attribution comment. We're looking at oil and gas, and we're looking at power plants and cement plants. And refineries, most likely, right? And so if you look at the 14 people that pay 80 entities that pay 80% of our fees, that's exactly who we're talking about. So long stories, we spend probably more resources on a facility like Colstrip than we currently account for, that I can tell you, but it's probably not, as I mentioned, 44% of the total. Any other questions or comments, or everybody getting their breath back?
I have a question, Dave. Maybe I should know this, but so you guys are not under a mandate necessarily to collect as much money as you need. You're not bound by law to do that. So if you need $4.5 million, the program is mandated to raise $4.5 million, or you do not have to raise $4.5 million. Hopefully you can make that up via other means.
Not completely accurate. There is a requirement, if we were to maintain primacy, which was one of our goals, is the state of Montana will stay in the lead on all these programs. there is a requirement that you collect sufficient Title V operating fees to run your program. Now, we've made that demonstrate, that's what the federal presumptive fee is. The feds presume that it costs you $49.53 a ton when, I think that was the federal, $49.85. The federal presumptive, that's the basis of the presumptive fee.
So maybe where I'm going is, if it's not maybe quite required legally, is that a goal of the program to 100% self-fund? Or should that be a goal?
Self-fund, help me out with that one.
I.e., the money you raise with your revenue 100% covers your expenditures.
Absolutely. We want to cover our projected expenditures. We want to collect, we want to run the program that we think we need to have. Sometimes we go up with staff, sometimes we go down with staff as we adjust, and there's mechanisms for doing both. We want to collect the appropriate amount of money from whatever revenue sources that we can get to use appropriately. You know, fees cover fee activities, general fund covers general fund activities, grant kind of shoulders between the two of them, and try to get as much as possible. We only want to collect what we need, which is tied to the appropriation. However, we have in the past and may again in the future seek a reduction or an increase in appropriation as necessary. So we're not fixed to the appropriation level. That does cause some consternation from decision makers when we're not collecting our appropriation. BER asks, legislature, other management, if you don't need it, why do you have it?
I got some.
Dave, thank you.
I'll catch up.
All right, thank you. Did that answer your question, Chris?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand a little bit more.
Yep.
Yes.
So we've needed this $4.3 million in revenue over the last 10 years. We haven't had to come to you to collect all of it because we've had other funds that have been able to kick in and cover. And we've collected more over time at that 38.24 because emissions were higher. And so that combination of things, lack of ability to backfill, emission reductions, we're at a point now where we can sustain what we believe are appropriate operations at this point in time, which is roughly 39 FTE, without a fee increase. Now, here's a question, you know, if we were to go at the higher level and go in front of BER and collect the revenues, and if federal grant was to be restored and some of those assumptions, you know, don't happen, like a 30% reduction in grant, we absolutely go back and are fiscally responsible and manage that and don't grow programs.
Yeah. To your point, you've already looked at the expense side pretty darn hard.
Yep. And we'll continue to do so. So I think we got a quorum on the phone. You know, I think we should just. Now I'm gonna float an idea, and I don't want to rush. You know, I understand people are seeing this for the first time. I'm certain we need additional conversation. Like I mentioned, Alan Olson is not here. I certainly wouldn't want to be the one standing in front of BER proposing to raise fees without talking to the oil and gas folks. We need to do that. We also need to have whatever changes we make done in October.
Yeah.
The bills go out in November. We need a little bit of time to adjust the algorithms for the fee collection and get the bills ready to go out in November. This takes 3 board hearings. Initiation, then there's a hearing between board meetings, and then there's the final one. We have 4 meetings between now and including October. We got one in April, one in June, one in August, and one in October. Did I get that right, Liz? Yep. And the one in October is early in October. So worst case scenario, that could work.
You could use it if you needed it.
We could use it if we need it. I would love to be able to initiate a rule in front of BER that appropriately sets the scope of the rulemaking. So what I'm going to float as an idea, I want to get a reaction, that proposes a number up to $1,000 for oil and gas well facilities and $53.50 a ton. I already mentioned that we've got some additional tonnage that will most likely be less than 5350. But it's up to such that we can continue to have discussions, and if we get additional information or think it's appropriate to come in at the smaller number, we're still within the scope of that notice. We're getting some back. Is that from downstairs? Sorry for the echo on the phone, folks. Gordon, did you get that? Gordon, I totally agree. And 4985, Gordon. And one, interestingly enough, you hit on one of the aspects that we were contemplating, with senior management, is why don't we go right to the federal presumptive fee? Clearly, that will be halfway between 45 and 53. And so we would be collecting close to the 4.3, but not quite. Yeah, it's close. It's within $4 per ton. So $200,000. You'd increase $200,000. You'd get the $4 million roughly in collection. And so to Gordon's point, before anything was finalized by the board, I think Gordon's absolutely correct. Before we ask the board to finalize something above the presumptive fee, we would need a lot of ammunition to get through stakeholders and engender support for that moving forward. If we were, I'm not so sure we'd need the same type of ammunition for initiation. So clearly I'm shooting for the moon here in terms of, support, trying to get as high as possible with the understanding that that is the absolute cap, both because the scope wouldn't tolerate anymore and we wouldn't ask for any more than that. It allows the conversations to gel, to occur, especially since we have, we'll learn more with the oil and gas well facility folks.
And the federal budget.
And the federal budget. It allows the most flexibility. One of the things, admittedly, once you put that number out there, sometimes it's hard to retract it, that some folks think it's cast in stone. And I do understand that as a concern. Oh, you drive a hard bargain, Gordon. No, Gordon, I fully expected that, and that makes sense. That gets us a lot of the way where we need to go, and also helps to minimize the kicking of the can down the road for the subsequent conversations. Now, I'm not taking that, Gordon, also as cast in stone. I need to take that to the oil and gas well. We need to take it to the Alan Olson group. Timing-wise, the absolute last, that I would be comfortable with would be initiating in June. April's already coming up, and I don't know if we've missed the boat on that or not. because that's an April 6th board hearing. What we've done in the past, and this board is not necessarily accustomed to it, although Dexter would be, was that we've asked them to schedule a meeting between board meetings. So you need 2 official meetings if you have time between meetings to conduct, the hearing on that. So we've done it in 2 before, and fees were what really drove it. And I don't know, I haven't run it, I know Norm is sitting there and we're gonna be challenged a little bit with, not with Norm as legal, but just the board legal and the agency legal with, the unfortunate passing of John North. Things are more challenging now. There's a lot of institutional knowledge, history, everything that's gone. So my thought on next steps is to take away from this conversation, preparing some sort of notice or packet for the board using the federal presumptive up to, we will be able to update our numbers. Also have the same conversation with the oil and gas well facility folks. Try to get initiation done as quickly as we can. The sooner we get initiation, the more time we can spend, I think, on after that. We still need to come back as a CAC probably in mid-May, no later than, and have additional conversations, give you all a chance to think about it. Come back with any detailed questions that you have. Please don't wait till May. Whenever you have them, please get them to us. Allow us to do some additional outreach. Hopefully we will learn about the federal budget and we can adjust as necessary then. This is for fiscal year 19, correct? November of 18. It's kind of confusing. Fiscal year 19, November of 18 is when the bills go out, and they're based on emissions of 2017. But yes, they would go out in the November bills that need to be paid, in late 18, early 19 calendar years.
So Dave, if you initiate a draft of the language that you want, we can talk about that as a group until it actually goes into formal rulemaking, which you're thinking June. Then it becomes a public comment period.
Yeah. All the board does is initiate rulemaking. They don't act on it, just the initiation. I would hope we would all go together. Generally, you have rules already fairly final form before we initiate. Fees are very different. I would hope we could all go together and say, okay, this is it, whether it's 44, 47, 49, whatever the case may be. That's what I would look for.
And we would look for a final in August, is how this.
If we could final in August, that would be much more headspace for us.
If we can initiate that in April, then we can final in August. Is how that would.
Yes. Yep. No, Gordon and Abby, this might be of little consolation. This is how we've historically done it, and we have not changed our fees in 10 years. These are the time frames based on the current system structure that we have of going on the previous calendar year's emission inventory. That's what it gets us. I totally agree, Gordon, and predictability is really huge for a lot of facilities. We've heard it through the years. That might be some of the long-term structural changes we make, is that we don't base it on the previous calendar years. Maybe it's 2 calendar years. If we were to do 2 years of 2017 inventories, for instance, just as an example, we would have that predictability. Then it's just a matter of finding out our target revenue. Yeah, are your question was asked, are your budgets more aligned with the calendar year, Gordon? Okay. I'm wondering if there's an opportunity. I haven't looked at the flexibility or thought flexibility on the collection. And if it's certainly there's a lot of discretion we employ, there are some folks that take a long time to pay their bills and we try to work with them. So, I mean, I don't know if you're talking 4 months or if you're talking a full year or combinations of both. Okay. Yeah, certainly from our perspective, January, February, March of 2019 are far different than maybe October of 2019 in terms of collecting. Oh, gotcha. Well, I got to think there's some way for us to work through that, Gordon. Oh, you bet. So how about this as a, I got to raise Gordon one. If we give you till March of 2019, can we go to 5350?
Yeah, you said the
Oh,
right
no.
number.
What was that, Chris?
Well, Gordon said put the right number in, so I just wondered what number that was.
Yeah, I'm just kidding you, Gordon. I know, funding is no laughing matter. And I do apologize for, that's the way our structure is, and I think you've pointed to some things that we need to change long-term, is try to figure out, maybe one of our objectives ought to be a little more predictability.
So are you still thinking of a rule, launching the rule process in April?
Well, that's why we have our planning staff here, Peggy. Excellent question. To listen to this conversation is to be able to put together a notice, appropriate notice, and just as quickly as possible. And I please don't want to, I don't want folks to feel like we're rushing them. But then go out and say, okay, can we still make the April meeting? That's only 3 weeks away, 2.5 weeks away.
I'm looking to Nora.
And so then I don't want to, we do not have a notice or anything that, there's some issues with laundry lists and other things just in the transition right now. And so that's something that we need to go talk through moving forward. That would be the earliest, clearly, that we could do. I'll tell you right up front, one of the things that concerns me is this is our first conversation and we've only got 2.5 weeks to, go in front of the BER. And one of the things that all of us are very cognizant of is, we enjoy a very robust stakeholder process and we've been very successful working through a lot of issues with the stakeholders, and I don't want to compromise that for short-term gains.
I think that's trying to catch people by surprise when walls go up.
Yep.
And so I guess I encourage maybe slowing it down and let people take this back and share with their constituencies.
What it allows us to talk through too is if we did initiate in June, can we do some off-cycle hearings, something like that, to where we can still finalize in August? I mean, working back from August is the preferred approach. I just don't know if April absolutely needs to be in there, so we can look at that.
I think there's risk in trying to rush it.
Very fair point. Anything else on the phone? All right, well, please, thank you for hanging in there. If you do have ideas for this year, future years, please share them. Stay tuned. We will absolutely communicate with you as we go along here. Very vital. We do have one last presentation moving forward, or excuse me, to close out the meeting. So thank you all very much.
Yeah, yes, just go one more slide. There we go. And there's the.
And this works.
Yep.
Dave didn't convince me.
I know.
So I'm Julie Ackerlin, and I'm with the Analysis and Planning Services section. And I'm just giving an update, a much lighter topic than what we've been discussing. So, and I also appreciate knowing that a few on the phone and a few in the audience attended our workshop last month on February 27th. We hosted a source test protocol workshop. And as we're talking about fees, you know, this is instrumental in doing your compliance demonstration of what your emissions are. So it does tie in a little bit to what Dave was talking about. Anyhow, we really look forward to the opportunity to meet with all of our stakeholders. It was a really great educational and outreach opportunity for us. We sent out a lot of invitations, and I hope everybody in CAC was receiving those in early February. In addition to the CAC members that received it, we went back into our database for the last 5 years just to look and see who had done source tests, and we grabbed those folks out of the database and folks that they were using for consultants to do source testing for them, and reached out to those folks as well. So we felt like we were going to be able to reach to one of our broader stakeholder groups that would be interested in this particular workshop. And we had 26 people attend the workshop. That does include those of us that presented from DEQ. But we were really pleased with the turnout, the involvement, the discussions that took place there. In addition to a few agency folks that we had there, we also had a number of consultants from Helena that came in that do source testing. They brought a wealth of knowledge with them from all their experience working through preparation of these protocols and whether they were using them in the field, and just having a good understanding of them. We also had a nice representation of industries that showed up. And here's my list of industries. Sometimes we had duplicate folks from the same facility, but we actually had a few that had multiple folks from the same industry show up. We had folks that even flew in from Texas, came across the state. So what we really liked in particular was that we had folks that came from small industries, people that came from large industries, people that did source testing in-house, others that hired out the consultants. We had a few folks that even do source test protocol programs that are the 5-year long protocols that they will repeatedly use. So we were able to gather a nice variety of information from everybody, coming from very different perspectives on how they use those protocols. When we first went out to everybody to find out who could attend, we sent a survey out, and we wanted to address and make certain that we covered the information that folks attending the workshop really wanted to see and hear and discuss. So we addressed those, and these were the topics that came up. We started off with discussing what it was that the DEQ does once we receive a protocol. And Grant Rodway from Field Services staff walked everybody through the steps that our program goes through when we do receive a protocol. The next big topic was protocol schedules, and we had a pretty robust discussion on that. There aren't a lot of dates in there, but the few dates that are in there definitely do challenge people at times, are appreciated by others at times. So we did have a good discussion about what those schedules are, and got some ideas for potential changes for those schedules that might improve the process for some. And the biggest lift that we did that day was walking through the protocol content. So the source test protocols are required to contain all the information that we have in the Montana Source Test Protocol and Procedural Manual. And that's been adopted into our rules. And so Grant Rodway walked us through every section of that manual that pertains to the protocol. And we had a discussion during each one of those segments of information to discuss what really was helpful in the protocol, what challenges folks found with the protocol, and any other thoughts and ideas that they had about it. So when we got done with our program at the end of the day, we had about 6 pages of flip chart notes that had been collected throughout the course of the workshop. And at this point in time, the Bureau is reviewing and assessing all those notes and working on ideas and taking some time to think about what can possibly be good next steps. So we'll stay in touch with everybody that attended and with the CAC group as well, and let you know where we decide we can take our next steps and keep everyone informed. And we're looking forward to more participation with everybody. So that's as much as I have for an update on the workshop. I don't know if anyone's got a question about the workshop.
Did you charge a fee?
No, I wonder how much we might consider, but yeah.
We thought about it very quickly.
Yeah. All right, I'll turn it over. I think Rebecca was going to give a quick update on a few items.
Next slide. Yeah, I think so. Let's see what happens. There you go. Cool. All right. I got it really easy today because I just have to get up here and close the meeting. So, I want to thank everybody who did participate today. I know we had a lot of folks on the phone, and sometimes that can be challenging, but we're continuing to try to make it as easy and as interactive for you as we can. Of course, I want to also acknowledge that we do have other Bureau projects that are ongoing. CAC has been hearing updates on those the last few meetings, and while today we focused on fees, we do intend to continue updating CAC in the near future on those other projects. So my question before we end is just, are there any questions in general or any topics you're interested in hearing about at the next meeting? If you can't think of anything today, it sounds like there's nothing coming to mind right away. You can always contact either myself or Liz. Our contact information is on the slide. Of course, you can get in touch with Dave or any of your other contacts at the Air Quality Bureau and let us know if there's anything in particular you want to hear about. Our next meeting, it sounds like we're looking at probably mid-May. So we'll be in touch to try to schedule that. And I'm sure you will be hearing a lot more from us regarding the fee discussion. So thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time this afternoon. And I think that's it for us.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks. A long day. Thank you, and Chris, thank you for coming.
How can we help you get this, without misrepresenting what you just said here, get this out to folks so the conversation?
Well, first I'll start off, do you have any meetings scheduled?
Sure. Maybe I could do a call.
If you need help, we'd be more than happy to come talk. That's what I wanted